One of the important things with these events is not only the types of speakers that you're going to have. The people that are speaking have a lot of experience, and I really encourage you to ask questions of them. That's some of the best ways to learn. But also networking is a big one. And I find it can be a challenge for a certain type of personality. About 30% of us are introverts, and about 70% of us are extroverts, and you know who you are. But networking can be easy for introverts too. You just have to start small. One of the easiest techniques I learned going to conferences was just stand in front of an exposition booth for about 5 minutes, and eventually someone will start talking to you. They'll think you know something, or the exhibitor will start talking to you. So that's a really easy one if you're feeling like you haven't really broken out of your shell yet. Follow up. So if you hear somebody say something that piques your interest, ask them a question. And it works really well because people have egos. And when they know that you've paid attention to what they had to say, they'll respond. This works really well too. A lot of people who are starting businesses say, I don't know where to find out the information about this type of business. And the reality is, ask the people who've already done the business. There's a sort of a fear that if you're starting the same type of business as someone, there's that competitive aspect. And it's there, but I find in general, especially in the farm community, your competitors also want to see you succeed. So, you may want to look in other communities if you're worried about that. If you're starting a certain business in Quail, you may want to phone someone in Smithers. But phone them and say, hey, I see what you're doing. I think it's really awesome. This is an amazing business, and I wish I could do it one day. Tell me how. And you'd be amazed how much information they'll give you. So if you want to find out the information about your specific business, ask someone who's already done it, because it has been done, trust me. And I just want to also acknowledge the fact that it's Sunday, and that's usually a day that most of us use to be with family and friends, to relax, take time off of work, and instead you've all chosen here to be with me. So that's very flattering, but also a little bit worrying about your priorities. But no, I'm kidding. I'm really glad that you guys are here. This really demonstrates that you're committed to putting the energy into your business that's needed, and for those of you who aren't running a farm, to supporting those who are. So it's a really great thing to see. So I'm going to get into the meat of it now. We'll talk about the facts. So I'll explain a bit about what my program is. For those of you who aren't familiar, the program I run is called Beyond the Market. And it's taken on a variety of forms the last 3 years. It started about 3 years ago. I work in the Community Futures office in Prince George, the Fraser Fort George Community Futures office, and I partner with the offices in Vanderhoof and Houston and Terrace. And I feel like, I feel really flattered today because Community Futures North Caribou has been mentioned, the Caribou-Chicoutimi office has been mentioned. So I think there's a running theme with Community Futures here, and that's really great to see in the North. Makes me really proud to work where I do. So what we do with Beyond the Market is we essentially provide support for the industry, for small farm businesses in terms of startup. We combine the services that Community Futures offers with business planning, coaching, small loans and financing, with sort of that extra agricultural kick. So I've been spending 3 years researching all of the aspects, or as many of the aspects as I can, involved with farm businesses, whether it's health codes, whether it's marketing strategies, whether it's customer preferences, trends in industry, supplier companies. These are all things that I've assembled all the time, and usually things that other farmers have given me. I came from a forestry background, so I knew nothing about agriculture when I started. And as I started working at this job, I realized just how much that service was needed. When I first started, I was really sort of working really hard to get the word out there, to let people know I was here. And by the end of 3 years, I'm getting phone calls every day, and I can't keep up, and I wish there was 3 of me. And it's really nice to see, but it's also, it puts a little bit of worry into you because the funding for these types of things is not always there. So most of the folks who come from the Highway 16 region know that the programs I have to offer, but I'm excited to say that we're planning to expand it to the Caribou as well. We've had a lot of requests from some of the regional district directors and other community groups in the Caribou. So I don't have confirmation that will be coming yet, but in April you will know. And at that point I'll be bringing all kinds of workshops, I'll be bringing libraries, I'll be bringing coaching services for farmers, and I'm really excited to do that. One of the things I do in that capacity is I advise other groups about what the North needs and what new farmers need. Because there's a lot of economic development agencies, a lot of industry development groups, that have largely ignored agriculture for a long time. And they're realizing now that agriculture does have a very tangible part of our economy up here. We don't always see it, it's not very visible. But when a community, when a mill closes or a community hits a bit of a slump, agriculture is always there. It was what keeps people on the land base, and it's a really important part of a strong rural economy in creating consistency over those ups and downs. And I always try and drive that message home. Agriculture is not going to lead us in employment. It's not going to create more jobs than mining and forestry. It's going to keep people there over the long term in the long run, and it's going to support a lot of families. So that's why it's important. But there is some surprising statistics I'll get to in a minute. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the types of new farmers that I've run into, because I think when we're talking about supporting new farmers, it's important to recognize that they're not one group. There's lots of different types of new farmers. And I'm a little bit surprised, actually, because the services that I run in the north ended up becoming very different compared to the services that are run in the south, which we originally modeled our programming on. So I'll speak to these different types of farmers, and maybe some of you might identify with that, and some of you might start to think about how you could change your programs and services and support to work with a certain type of new farmer. So the first type of new farmer I've got is the young career farmer. And this person usually has lots of experience. They may have worked on a farm with their parents or their family. They may have been employed on a farm previously. Usually they come to the table with a lot of working knowledge. They know how to grow and raise basically animals and livestock, produce, whatever it may be. And they know how to make the machinery work. They've got a lot of those really hard to develop skills that take years to come along. So they've got a great asset set when they come. Sometimes, however, they lack the business skills. So they've never had to deal with payroll or taxes. They've never had to deal with the health authorities. This is always something that their parents dealt with or their employers dealt with. And so the services they really need is working through the management skills. And that's a lot of what I work with the young career farmers. They're often looking to, when they're developing their own business or they're taking over the family farm, to redefine themselves in the shadow of their predecessors. So they may have taken over a cow-calf operation from their parents, and now they're looking at finished beef. Or they may be switching completely, as we heard from one of the farmers yesterday, from beef to vegetables. This is pretty typical, but I find the folks that come from a background is they want to establish their own identity, and so they're looking to make a fundamental shift or change in the business that they're taking over. These are the best farmers to work with if you want quick results. They've got the skills and assets to make it. They just need a little bit of support with the management and potentially some networking and information about the new markets they might be targeting or interested in running. However, these young career farmers are becoming fewer and far between. I have a feeling their population is shrinking. A lot of them are leaving the farm for other careers, as we all know. And this is something that's very different about the north. I'll get into that. We also have the elder career farmer. And when I say I work with new and young farmers, it's not really age-based. I work with farmers of all types, and I'll get into that. The elder career farmer has farmed for many years under one production model or another production model, and at some point they have some sort of midlife crisis or transformative experience, and they decide to completely change the direction of their business. That's a new farmer to me. They have to go through the same decision-making process. They have to go through the same challenges as a new farmer because they're learning a completely different set of production models, of markets, and all different kinds of technologies that are available. So they need support too, even though they've done farming for years and they're well into their sort of later half of their working age. The next type of farmer that I work with are the greenhorns. And these are the folks that don't come with a lot of farming experience. So they're looking for the technical know-how. Some of the greenhorns come with business experience, so they may have run other businesses in other capacities or had some sort of management role in their previous career. And I find the biggest difficulty with working with this type of farmer is that they have to reconcile their dreams with the reality of the business. The career farmers come having learned that process a long time ago, what the reality of farming is. But a lot of the greenhorns have to overcome this huge challenge of understanding that their dream doesn't always manifest on the ground the way that they like to see it. And that's a really big personal, emotional challenge for them to get over, and it's a little bit harder for me to deal with in a structured program. Nonetheless, they come with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of spirit. It hasn't been broken yet. And so they're a really great group of people to work with. They're really eager to learn. And they bring all kinds of amazing other perspectives from other industries. So we get people who've worked in tech sectors, financial sectors. We get people who've done research studies at the university. So they bring all these amazing pockets of knowledge into the agriculture sector. And it's amazing to be able to merge that with the other folks doing farming. There's also the future farmer. So this is the person who basically walks up to me and says, I want to be a farmer when I grow up. They haven't done any training, they don't have any land, but they know that one day that's the dream. They too have to go through a transformation process, but sometimes I find more often than not, maybe 99% of the time, the future farmer doesn't make it to the farm. They find another job, they have kids, there's a lot of pulls away from farming, and so working with the future farmer I find can be very challenging. I like to work with people who are at the next stage. And I think there's a big role for the community to play in terms of bringing that future farmer into the greenhorn stage, getting them a bit of skills, getting them a bit of experience, inviting them to come work on the farm, really helping them decide if farming is actually what they want to do. The problem that I see with the future farmer is a lot of our programs and services in the province are structured around this type of farmer. They're for the people who have no assets, no experience, and we're really going to just give it to them to get them there. You see this with the incubator type model, where you're providing land and training for someone who doesn't have either. Great model, works for a very small percent of the population, people who don't have kids, who don't have a land base they have to look after, who don't have animals, who can leave the house for 6 months to do a training program. 90% of the farmers in the north that I work with don't fall into that category. They have a family, they have a land base, they have horses, they have to go to work, and so the training and support that they need is little bits at a time. The next type of farmer that I work with is the rural retirement dream farmer. This is someone who's worked maybe in town or in the city. They've retired and they've decided that their dream has been to live off the land and make a little business out of it. Great type of person to work with. The only thing they really lack, they have a bit of lack in terms of technical knowledge depending on what they've done in their previous career and how long they've been on the land base. But they essentially have all the business and financial management experience they need. But sometimes they need a little motivation. They've retired. And so when they hit a roadblock and it gets to feel a little bit challenging, sometimes they really question why they're doing what they're doing. And so it's important to keep them inspired and reassured that they are an important part of the agriculture sector. A lot of the old folks get flack sometimes for going into it in their retirement age, but it's a great thing. I love to see it because you know what it means? It means people from Vancouver moving to Indaco to start a farm and start a family. And that's the kind of thing we want to see in the north. So I really like to work with these people because they've got a lot of life experience and they just need the motivation, support, and networking to keep them moving forward. And then the final type of farmer, which I rarely see here in the north, but is a very common new farmer that's targeted in the States and Eastern Canada, is the new Canadian. These are people that have come from other countries and have immigrated to Canada. Maybe their partner has found work in another sector, but they have had experience with agriculture in their native country. You see a lot of programs in Ontario and the States that try and help new immigrants get into farming. And some of them have done quite well because they come with a cultural ethnic background that helps them serve an underserved part of the Canadian market. We all know the Canadian population is growing because of immigration, and pretty much that's it. And so we're seeing a lot of demand for types of products that Canadian farmers typically haven't grown. One of the best stories I saw was about an incubator in the east that had a Jamaican farmer come in and start growing amaranth for the Toronto area. Well, there are a lot of countries that use amaranth as a staple crop, and almost zero farms in Canada that were growing it at the time, or at least accessible in the Toronto market. He made a killing. It was a great success. We're seeing it with his other products. And especially if those people come with a family network and a friend network, they can very easily find their markets when growing these very specific products. I don't, however, see these types of farmers in the north, and my best guess as to why is the allure of the industry that we have that pays a lot better. And you can walk right into a job most of the time and get set up for your new life in Canada. So this is, and I kind of am hinting at it, but there's a lot of things in the north that are a little bit different about the programs you see in Vancouver, or Abbotsford, or the Okanagan. And I'll get into those, and then I'll start doing the fun part of the thing. So what's different about the north, and why are we a little bit worried about farming in the north? Well, the first part is true for all farms, but specifically in the north, because the distances are greater, is isolation. There's a lot of distance between our communities, a lot of distance between our residences, a lot of distance between our towns. And so it's just harder, it requires more money, more effort, more time, and more people to make those connections. So you just have to work a little harder to be able to reach out to people. Infrastructure, so we have great highways. We've got great rail. Well, I guess maybe you guys don't, but Highway 16 does. We've got an international airport infrastructure, so we've got some great transportation infrastructure. But we're missing three-phase power in some of our communities. We don't have business centers in all of our communities. Somebody asked me, where can I buy irrigation equipment for my farm? I don't know. You might have to go to Vernon for that. So we don't always have the business services that support the agriculture sector in the north. Oftentimes our farmers have to travel to Alberta, to the Okanagan, to the Lower Mainland to pick up the supplies they need, and that's a problem. The labor market. We have a very tight labor market generally in the north. It's obviously different from town to town. The unemployment rate in Prince George, I think, is at 4%, which is incredibly low. It's unlikely that you can entice someone who's looking to make money and to support their family to go into farming when the option to go into the other industries pays about twice as much. And we're not going to be seeing any relaxation in this labor market crunch anytime soon. Terrace, which is one of the communities I deal with, 2 years ago I was actually looking at property in Terrace and relocating out there. Housing prices were very good. 2 years later there was a 0% vacancy rate in the Terrace rental market. Developments in Kitimat, Prince Rupert have basically driven massive change in the rental and housing market there. And so something like that really influences agriculture as well. Climate. I don't need to say much about that. It's really all about managing your seasons and working within smaller windows. We can grow a lot of things, but hay is a really good example. So in a lot of communities, they suggest using custom labor, hiring a farmer to do your hay. You can't really do that here because there's only a 1 week window you can cut your hay, and everyone's cutting their hay. There's no spare tractors to be had. I'm not sure if that's the same case in the Caribou, but it certainly is in the Highway 16 region. And so the windows just make it really tight to share equipment, to share knowledge, to share time, but everything can still be done, mostly everything. For those of you who don't know, Terrace actually used to be an orchard community. It gets about 120 frost-free days on average, I think, a year. Obviously, when the Okanagan took off, it really took over Terrace's market. This is back in the pioneer days. But there's still fruit trees growing in Terrace, and a lot of people don't recognize that there are some banana belt climates in the north as well. I'm told that there's some Macleese Lake area is probably one here in the Caribou, as well as others. Forestry. Forestry is an interesting one because it affects all of our communities very deeply and very drastically. Sometimes it's complementary and sometimes it's competitive. I find a lot of people who farm also work in the forestry industry, and they're able to farm because they do, say, forestry work in the winter and farming work in the summer. So the presence of the forestry industry is very important to agriculture, but there's also some competitive issues. The timber supply is a big one these days, and I think we're going to see a lot more pressure from the forestry industry to move into some of the ALR lands. So there's some worry about that, but we'll see how the interactions play out. Technology, it's often slow to make it up to the north, whether it's high-speed internet or just different types of technologies that are available. Livestock. Livestock is the bread and butter in the north. We're not talking about tomatoes typically. We're not talking about produce, which is sort of the icon of the local food movement. We're talking about animals and we're talking about proteins. And so when we're talking about local food, we can't ignore these things. And I don't think that's something I have to reiterate to this crowd, but I think it happens a lot with the folks who don't understand what farming is in the north. They get fixed on the tomato, and for me, it's all about the animals. Not all about it, but. Small populations are another one, so we work with communities that are very small. What's the population of Dunster?
3. They're all here.
somewhere between 50 and 200, maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say, it's a little bit of a counterculture community. But McBride is 800 people, 400 people. So, I mean, when you're talking about targeting a local market, you're dealing with 400 people. So if you're taking over 10% of the market, that's 40 people. I mean, to grow your business, you really have to start looking outside of the local community, and that's one of the challenges because we just have small populations here. So that's sort of when you want to try and contextualize what the challenges or the opportunities in the North are for farmers. There's one I've forgotten, the biggest one: land. Has anyone ever tried to buy a house? I mean, what happens to housing prices as you move further south? They go up. And I think it's amazing. Like, I have a friend here, and they just recently bought property out in the Chaco area, and I think they paid $1,000 an acre, quarter section. I think that's sort of the hallmark for a lot of people that are buying quarter sections. Go and try and find a quarter section for $1,000 an acre anywhere south of, I don't know, 100 Mile House? Good luck. So there's a lot of land out here. We have, I think, where's the stat here? Okay, here's a quiz. How much of the agricultural land reserve is in the northern and interior regions of the province? Any guesses? I heard one. 75. Higher. 82. 82% of the province's agricultural land reserves is in, I think, and I'm pretty sure the interior stops at the Thompson Regional District, so it's basically the Cariboo North. It's pretty surprising. I mean, we're talking about changes in the agricultural land reserve. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about our area, our backyard. The Peace is a pretty significant portion of that. I think the Peace is 49% of the agricultural land reserve, and the other 32 is, or 47%, the other 32 is sort of this interior area, west coast area, north coast. So it's pretty significant, and I think it surprises a lot of people just how much of the agricultural land reserve is here. Because when you see the agricultural land reserve in the news, they're always talking about the Fraser Valley and the island. But while they're very productive land pieces that they're trying to protect, it's a very small piece of the pie. So we deal with very land-extensive farming operations here, livestock. And I think it's important for people to recognize that the solution to, oftentimes the solution to making small farm businesses work is intensification, densification, intensive planting, and those can be done here, but the staple here is extensive land-based farming. And I think for me, what I'd like to do is people in the South don't even recognize that you can grow things up here. And so I'm traveling to the Richmond Farm School through Kwantlen Polytechnic, UBC's farm school, a couple of the farms in the South to go and talk to the students, show them the real estate prices, show them some of the stories of the farms that are here, and just say, this is an option for you. Don't forget about us, because we have a lot of opportunities for young people. And not only can you start a farm, but you can probably find a job too. So I really enjoy that part, is just advocating for the North and saying farming is a real thing here, and it's pretty significant. And this is where I get into, where am I at my time? Okay, this is where I get into the game. So this is sort of a guessing game, and I think it's really eye-opening for some people to hear the numbers. So I'm just going to start by qualifying that this came from the agricultural census that was done in 2011. How many of you fill those out? Have ever filled out an ag census? Yeah. So this is the information that came from those ag census. Are they mandatory for you, or are they voluntary?
It was mandatory last time.
Okay. If you're a farm, it's mandatory. Okay. So these are pretty good statistics. And so I took all of the statistics numbers for basically the Cariboo Regional District North, so the northern half of the province. I think I might have lost the Central Coast, so the Bella Coola, Bella Bella areas, but when I did look at those numbers, they were pretty tiny, so they don't really affect the overall numbers here. So any guess as to how many farms are in the north and central, we'll just call it the north. How many farms are in the north of the province here? Cariboo all the way up to the top of BC. Any guesses? Higher. 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 4,234 farms, which makes 6,385 farmers. 2% of our northern population is are farmers here, which is actually pretty high. The region that I'm talking about is about 315,000 people, so 7.2% of the province's population. How much employment do you think our farms generate? How many full-time equivalents do you think farms in the north generate? And these are not people that own the farms. These are the employees, hired workers. These are people that get paychecks. How many employees does our farming industry create? 1,000 full-time equivalents in the north. And surprisingly, it's not all coming from the Peace. The Peace is actually one of the areas that generates the least employment for its size. In the Cariboo, there's 622 people employed by the agriculture sector, 227 full-time equivalents. That's a pretty significant industry. So be very proud of that. And that's not even the people that own the farms. These are the people that are employed by farms. We're not even talking about the owners here. So what do we grow in the north? What's the biggest crop? Yeah, people forget about it because it's not food for people. It's food for animals, but it is our biggest crop and it's pretty important. How much of the hay crop do you think, of BC's hay crop, do you think the north grows? 62% is grown in the Cariboo Regional District North to the top. How much of the alfalfa crop do you think is grown in BC, or in the northern region of BC's crop production? 71% of our alfalfa. And this is on acreage, so I don't know how productive those acres are, but just in terms of the land base that's used to grow alfalfa, we have 71% of it here in the north. Let's go through a few more. How much of our cattle herd, BC's cattle herd, do you think is in the north? Almost half, 45%. And BC overall, and in terms of how much, so BC represents 35% of Canada's cattle herd, and we have about half of that here. So pretty significant. How much of the sheep herd do you think we have? 30% in BC's sheep herd. 10% of BC's pigs farms, though surprisingly, it's a small number. We have 25% of BC's pig farms, but we only produce 10% of BC's pigs. To me, that says there's a lot of small farms that raise a few pigs, but we don't have actually any big swine operations in the north. Eggs, 0.5% of BC's egg production. Dairy, any guesses? 20% of the dairy herd in BC is in the north. Bison, 90%. 90% of BC's bison herd is in the north. Horses, 40%. Goats, 25%. Rabbits, 17%. Fruit and berries, 0.2%. Vegetables, 10%. Acres under greenhouses, less than 0.1%, because it doesn't register. What's that? I can't hear you. Okay. What else do we got here? Computers. How many of those 4,234 farms use computers for their farm business? 54%, yeah. How many of those farms that use computers have access to high-speed internet? 60%. So I hear a lot of people complain about high-speed access, but the reality is that more than half of the people who use computers on their farm have access to it. Still a barrier for certain communities. So for example, Dunster is one of those communities. I mean, I love picking on you guys. I actually really love working with Dunster because it's the only place I get to send mail to general delivery at the post office box. That's a really, it's something that I cherish as a historical, cultural aspect is sending mail to general delivery. So, but there's lots of places in the north, almost everywhere still uses P.O. boxes. It's really difficult working with P.O. boxes because you can't just Google them. When I'm looking to send someone mail, the Yellow Pages usually provides you an address, but it gives you a street address. So when I'm trying to send somebody something in the mail, I have to actually phone them and ask them what their P.O. box is. You can imagine the kind of logistics when I deal with over 500 clients. So, I mean, one of the things in terms of web presence is if the only thing you have on the web is your farm name and your contact information, that's half the battle right there. Because most of the time, when we talk about having websites, people think big pictures and prices and interactive blah, blah, blah. You don't really need it. All you need is some way for people to find you and call you. That's all they're looking for. So start there if you don't have any web presence. One of the great things about Beyond the Market is we did a directory so that people could list their farm business there if they didn't have a website or if they did. And it was really successful to start with because I didn't circulate the sign up digitally. Well, I did, but I also offered people the opportunity to mail me their online directory info or fax me their online directory info. So as a result, we ended up getting 120 farms in our directory. I think this was a big key to success, and then we have to remember when we're rolling out programs and services, is the digital has to be there, but it has to be matched with the hard copy. I used the example of the New Farm Startup Guide that the Ministry puts out. Great guide, free guide, you can download it from the internet. When they sent me the internet link, I put it out through our email blast. We have an email list and a Facebook page. You can sign up for both of them on our website. A few people downloaded the document. And then I asked them to send me a couple cases of the hard copy books. I've distributed almost 300 copies of that New Farm Startup Guide at this point, but only because I brought the hard copy with me. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. How many of you appreciate having handouts when you go to a conference? All of you. And so anyone who does any sort of extension services, programming, and support needs to remember that. We live in pulp mill towns. We don't live in server and Google towns. Print it. It's recyclable. Trees are renewable resources. Get over it. If it costs money, that's fine. And I try and say, and it's really hard to express that to our public service agencies these days. Governments are all going paperless, and you need to reinforce that fact. That's just my own personal bias. I get a little political sometimes. Try not to. So I think that's all of the statistics I had and the questions I had. There's a couple key publications coming out. My program currently ends in the end of March, so I'm actually looking at my clock for how much time I have left to get these publications out the door. The two major publications that are coming out that I'm really excited about is the first one called the A to Z Guide to the New Northern Farmer. And it's basically, I've had hundreds of inquiries from farmers come in, and I've had to spend all the time researching and finding out the answers to their inquiries. And I thought, well, okay, if I move on, this is not recorded anywhere. So I spent months basically going through all the different inquiries and sorting them from A to Z. And so that guide will be out, and it'll probably have sort of a paragraph answer to each of the questions that people come in. What's an Ag Hort? How do I do my accounting software? All the rest of it. Those are the A's. I don't even remember what the rest of them are. So that's a really exciting one that'll probably be out hopefully by the end of February. And the second report is coming out. It's related to the other project I do, which is a project for the beef sector, trying to find them additional markets for local beef. Really happy to report that we've had some good successes. It's been tough, but UNBC is now using beef from Vanderhoof, Country Locker, and Chilacco Meats in their supply chain. New Gold in Vanderhoof, well actually it's just over there, but you access it from Vanderhoof, is using local beef in their exploratory camps. We have restaurants now in Prince George that are featuring farm-to-table menus, so they actually do whole hog butchery. If anybody's interested, it's Nancy O's. But we have other restaurants in Prince George that are doing some amazing stuff. We have more restaurants, period, in Prince George than we've ever had in the history of the city. It's a very competitive industry there, and we're starting to see a lot of those opportunities that Ed was talking about yesterday with what's happening in Kamloops. The trouble is there's no chefs network in the north. And so rather than having an organized legion of high-end chefs, I have sort of a disorganized gaggle of dabbling chefs. And they're fun to work with, but it makes a lot of pounding the pavement for me. One day they'll get there. One day they'll catch up to the farms.